You ready?
I guess I am.
It's too late. Here we are.
I'll run away now.
That's the point. There is no hiding. There's no more hiding for Katja. It's like now or never, and now is upon us. So usually I give everybody like a couple of minutes to join. I think I've just had the official notification that we are officially live. I like to do just a little sanity check, which we are. Hold on. So I can tell somebody's joined. I don't know who you are. Please feel free to say hi. This is also like a really exciting conversation for me. I'm really looking forward to it. So as I said, we'll wait a couple of minutes and then I will introduce myself potentially to your network. And likewise. So it's the weather today is just so depressing.
Yeah, I mean, I think, if you're in Germany, we've had like these most beautiful 3 days of summer after a really shitty winter, and now we're back into like autumn.
So true. Hi, Sophia.
Hi, Sophia.
I don't know who this is, but hello. Hi, John from Cheltenham. No, it's been like Saturday. So Sunday was fantastic. Monday was fantastic. And then it just went.
And do you remember that on Friday when we spoke briefly, it was snowing?
I
mean, I hate this. Like everybody always talks about the weather all the time, but I feel like it is an important thing to talk about, considering that we went from snow to like summer and then back again to autumn. So
right, it's that part where you go, once upon a time talking about the weather was something you used to do to fill conversations, but actually talking about the weather is so relevant because instead of being like 4 seasons in a day, it's 4 seasons in about 25 minutes.
Exactly.
I don't know what to wear. I don't know what to put on the kids. Like it's.
Yeah, we could also just go into like a bigger issue around global warming and climate change. I'll stop there.
Hi, Clarence. Now, I have to ask, which Birmingham is this? Is this Birmingham as in my hometown, the land of the Brummie, or is this Birmingham, Alabama? If it's my hometown, yay! Thanks for joining.
In both cases, thanks for joining.
Always thanks for joining, but an extra thank you. So, I'll do my quick introduction. So for anyone who doesn't know me, I'm Leanne Meyer, and I am the MD and founder of LM Consulting. We specialize in helping companies increase gender representation in senior leadership and management, but critically with the racial equity piece, which ensures that Black women and women of color aren't left behind. So today for me is really, and everything I do is kind of framed within, how can I make the world a better place? How can I make an impact? And it's the reason why I even started this series, was to be able to share a light on everybody else who's choosing different ways to create an impact, how they're doing it, but also to broaden and widen my own understanding, because there's so much that is going on, not just locally, but also globally, where we have the opportunity to work together, to learn from each other, and to essentially multiply the impacts that we're trying to create. So in talking to Catia, even though she will introduce herself, in talking to Catia, one of the most powerful, and I have to say powerful here, frameworks that she used was, how do we build a purposeful economy? Because most of the time we think about economics in terms of purely revenue generation. How does it work? How do systems work? But how about creating a system that is purely based on value and purpose? So without further ado, Catia, I'm going to hand over to you for you to give your introduction, and then we can jump right in.
That sounds lovely. Thank you so much. Hi, Tamana. Thank you so much, Leanne, for having me, and for that beautiful introduction. And you've pretty much summed it up already. So for everyone else, my name is Catia. I am based in Berlin at the moment. I'm originally from Portugal with roots and family history around India and Mozambique as well, so quite sort of all over the place. And I work at The Do, which is a organization that works with companies and entrepreneurs, leaders, entrepreneurs, so a range of people, communities, around empowering them to take action. So empowering them to take action, become active in their spheres of influence, and have an impact. And that can be pretty much anything. So we'll jump into that in a second. My job there is as a director of talent and staffing. So I get to work with people and focus on people. As my day-to-day business, I am responsible for putting our team together, making sure that they're fine, that they have good pathways for development, all of those things that we know about HR and people development. And then I also work with different streams of talent that come into the DO ecosystem, which are participants of our programs, fellows for our programs, for instance, stuff like we do around topics like climate action or food innovation. And then we also have a wonderful network of experts, which is how I met Leanne, that we bring in exactly to have different perspectives and to bring in fresh views on topics. And I get to be at this intersection of all these different streams of people that come in to work with the DO.
And I think the beautiful part about what you're doing is you sit in the middle of it all. And that's pretty much how it works in the kind of work that you're doing, because you see the people who want to be the game changers, you see the people who want to join the game changers, and you get to follow the whole chain through from what's the word? Not from what's the word I'm looking for? From conception, idea conception, from that point to implementation, to seeing the change. And I think that is a beautiful position to sit in, because it takes the element of impact and what people are doing. It takes out the distance and it makes it so human, so real.
Absolutely. And that's the best part of my job, is that I work with, I can speak to an entrepreneur from Zimbabwe one day, and the next day speak to the CEO of a big company, and then the next day bring all of these people together, obviously with the help of my colleagues and team members, and then we get to see these kinds of interactions and connections flourishing across from fields and people from different backgrounds that would never otherwise come together. So that's a really cool thing about my work. Yeah.
So listen, I'm going to jump into the first question, which is, what is a purposeful economy? And then, how do we go about understanding that and also implementing that in different ways on an individual level, but then how are companies looking to do that on a broader scale?
That's a massive question, Leanne.
I'm sorry.
Good. I'm going to break it down.
So much that I was like, sorry. I realized I was saying sorry. So we'll start with the first bit. What is a purposeful economy by the definition of the DO? Just because with everything, be it impact, be it perspective, whatever it might be, we all have our own personal definitions and interpretations. So it'd be amazing to hear, what's your interpretation?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and that's a great place to start. I think you're right in the sense that purpose and impact, they're these words that we all know about and heard about, but they're all quite buzzwordy as well. And it's very difficult to know what the substance is behind them. A purposeful economy for the DO is basically just an economy that looks at people and planet as well as profit, and that considers economy as having an impact, basically going beyond itself. So not a self-serving economy, but one that serves all the different people, systems, communities that interact with it. And we've defined it in a sense, we've basically said that a purposeful economy is an economy that's sustainable, resilient, and inclusive. I think sustainable is pretty straightforward. It's an economy that, that gives as much as it takes, I guess, that considering all aspects, so resources, workforce, everything, that isn't just taking, but thinking about how to keep the balance, or how to restore the balance, or how to regenerate if need be. Inclusive, well, I'll leave inclusive for the last bit. A resilient economy is, and this is, I guess, something that we wish we'd had in this current situation as well with COVID, right? So a resilient economy is one that is able to adapt and to deal with unforeseen circumstances, and especially considering the speed of change that we've been seeing in the last few decades, I guess, and also especially now with COVID in the last 2 years. It's an economy that probably isn't able to predict everything, but is flexible and adaptive enough. So it's kind of, I think paradoxically, a resilient economy is basically one that is not rigid, but very flexible.
Right.
And then inclusive, again, is a word that I guess resonates with everyone, and everybody has their own idea what it means. And I think it's also quite self-explanatory. An inclusive economy is just one, again, that serves everyone. And I mean, literally everyone. It serves the consumers as well as the shareholders, as well as, the workforce. It serves people who have been part of this economy so far, and those that haven't yet quite been able to be embraced by it. It serves those that have worked in the past, so the older generations and the future generations that haven't even come to existence yet. And it serves obviously people of different ethnic backgrounds and social backgrounds and professional paths and all of these things. So so that's how we at the Do define a purposeful economy.
Those are like three big statements: sustainable, resilient, inclusive. And I really like the concept about sustainability as the first one, because what you really said was when I go back to like the words of ecosystems, even though we're talking about economy, an ecosystem only works when it's fully in balance. Right. So the part about sustainability and keeping the ecosystems balanced. Right. So keeping the economy balanced so that it works, that we're taking out as much as we're putting in, but by taking out and putting in, we're still making sure that that balance is kept, so that the people that are losing are still the same people that are gaining, i.e. we're not going to take people and exploit them for minimum wage and make sure that the shareholders and stakeholders earn a load of money, but rather we're going to say, well, because we understand that an employee, or like we'll put it like that for the time being, is a mutually beneficial arrangement. You are paid for your time. We will make sure that in doing so, we keep that balance of how everybody benefits. Now, it might be different in terms of financial benefits, but in terms of how it serves everybody, you're keeping everything balanced. And I think a lot of times when we think about sustainability, also, and I was also guilty of this, I thought about it purely in terms of regeneration. That we can regenerate, that the cycle can keep going forward. It's sustainable. We can keep using it. We find a way to recycle it and bring it forward. But actually, the key point that you said is keeping things in balance. It's a finely attuned system. And as we know, balance is the hardest thing to come by.
True.
Especially when let's say the resilient part of the economy has been tested with COVID, but it's also increased the inequalities, especially from a wealth perspective, that the richer have become insanely rich and the poorer have become insanely poor. So it's like, how do we then create, and I completely see how difficult it is, and the magnitude of the question I asked you. It's like, how do we close the gap using the economy, making sure that what we put into it or what we take out of it, we put it back in, not one for one, but that it's still beneficial to all the participants, which is this bit over here, who play a role in that. And I think that is such a huge, and I mean this in a complimentary way, it's a very ambitious, but it's such a necessary way to think, because we have to disrupt the balance of the economy right now if we fundamentally want to get to the point that we can create a sustainable economy that's inclusive, that is resilient, that is prepared for what may come in, forget 5 years time, like 50 years time. I mean, the economic systems we've been using now, how old are they? Like 50, 70 years? I'm not even sure. So it's like the trends change. And I like the fact that you're thinking about that kind of forward-looking part too.
Yeah, and it's not like we really have a choice. I mean, we don't need to get into the details about what we were starting with as well, climate change and all of that, but it's not like we really have a choice. Like even now with COVID, it just showed us sometimes we just don't. We have to react. And with certain other topics such as climate change, we already know that we have to react. It's not even something that's just sort of sprung upon us and now we have to like be quick. And so I think this idea of like what you were saying about us, and I think a lot of other organizations and people and communities are thinking very big at this moment, is because we just don't have a choice. Like incremental steps or little tweaks here and there, or just business as usual. Like some structures are still clinging very hard to this whole, oh no, let's go back to. It's just not feasible. And if you don't want to think about it for yourself, then think about it for your child or your child's child, or just think about it from a sort of general perspective of leaving a better mark, leaving a positive impact in the world that you're going to leave at some point.
Right. But I think the key element of what you said there is also to you and I, this is a no-brainer, right? You and I, this is a no-brainer. This is how the economy should work. We should work in a sustainable, resilient, inclusive way. We should think about what we're doing. But I think it's not even the majority that's looking to change. The majority are still to some extent putting their heads in the sand to say, well, we can ignore climate change, we can ignore gender equality, we can ignore racial equity because this is going to go away. But I think those who have that opinion, it's actually no, we're not going away. You're going away because you won't be able to play in this market anymore.
Yeah.
Because if the drivers to change if you want to be a market participant, you have to understand the rules of the market. So if the market is changing and the rules are changing and you're still playing the old game,
yeah, exactly.
Where do you end up? And how do you then define yourself as being a thought leader? Because actually I take it back, thought leader is not what I like leaders in action. So how do you change that from being a thought leader to being a leader in action, to say, well, I understand what's going on and not only do I want to do it, because you made a really good point, everything that we're doing has forced us to be reactive. We're having to what's the word? Extinguish fires, that's the word. Extinguish fires to try and forge a new path. It's like, but you also have a wonderful opportunity, and I think you get to see this on a daily basis. You get to see the global view, talking to somebody in Zimbabwe, talking to somebody in the US. You get to see how people are looking at the world, not for this small piece of their area where they sit, but actually it's all open.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's all open change. Look, Karen.
I'm just thinking there's so many things about what you just said that I would love to respond to. I think with the last bit that you just mentioned, like having this global view, that is one of the great privileges of my job as well. And it also makes you aware of how, in the end, how close we are, in a sense, like the issues that affect us in Zimbabwe. And these are actual examples. Like last week, in the last 2 weeks, I've actually interviewed a number of people who are doing really great work around food innovation and how we can, think about regenerative agriculture or like waste recovery, circular economy, really, really interesting stuff. And and along with my other colleague, we've interviewed, I think, about 30, 40 people that are doing really cool stuff around this space. And so, and then when you talk to somebody in Zimbabwe and you talk to somebody in Berlin and you talk to somebody in Thailand, everybody is dealing with the same things, just different aspects of it, right? So whether it's, how am I going to survive now after COVID has taken away my job, or whether it's how am I going to leave a country for my children that still has, that still has like biodiversity, whatever the issues are, they have different facets, of course, and different facets affect different people. But in the end, we're all so much more closely connected because we're all dealing with the magnitude of everything that's happening. And that's a really cool thing, and also a really daunting thing, because these challenges are global. But that's also the reason why we at the DO and also so many other organizations tackle them on a global scale as well, because there's no way that if we do something here in Germany, that alone is going to save the rest of us, in a sense. Right?
And we have to have that mindset we have to have that global mindset to say, I don't need to just deal with people who are based in Europe because Western Europe is this, that, and the third, because it's just exactly what you said. It's accepting and understanding that there are so many different levels of innovation. People have ideas that in a million years, I could never imagine them. In a million years, like I see posts about people using like bottles to create modems, like plastic, and I'm like, what? How is that even possible? All these things that my brain can't possibly imagine, but at the same time, if you don't allow yourself to be exposed to it, also can't imagine it. And I think this is the point of solving or being in this space of wanting to change the world and leave it better than we found it, it means we have to challenge our own assumptions of what we think we know. Because ultimately, oh gosh, I know I'm going off on left here, but ultimately the world we see is a combination of things we imagine and systems we believe in, but it's not necessarily a reflection of the world at large.
Absolutely. And
carry on.
No, go on. I thought you want to finish your thought.
No, I was going to say, it's not a reflection of the world at large. So it also means that when we're looking at it, we have to say, well, I'm applying the lens of British-born, Black female Leanne who lives in Germany, who's thinking that this is a solution, but actually the solution is something completely different. And you get to see that, and you get to see it from conception all the way through. And I think that is such an exciting part of, like, right now, to be in that moment, to see how the future could look with all the kinds of innovation that's coming, especially outside of Europe, because we're still trained in many ways to be Eurocentric and thinking that the ideas hub is here, which it's not. So it's also kind of saying, hold on, there's so much that's going on the African continent. There's so much innovation, and understanding, well, hey, maybe it's for me to look and learn, because how I can make my impact as, yes, within my professional sphere, but how I can make an impact within my personal sphere also means we need to investigate that. Like, what does that also look like? And the fact that the do brings all of that together, I think is a really, really strong message as to how the world should look going forward in terms of how we work, how we position ourselves, and how we really build that network.
Right. And your point to how Eurocentric we are, I think, even though obviously at the Do, we are a global organization, we also have a campus in Hong Kong. And like we've discussed already so many times, through our expert network and through our Do community, we have so many people from so many different countries that we always get these perspectives. And still, sometimes we might just be caught in certain patterns of thinking that you just bring with yourself, right? Also, just because I am who I am and I have my own experience, and my experience is also very much, even though my family's from India and Mozambique, my experience is very much in Europe and in this sort of path. And one example that I have is recently when we were interviewing this. So basically for this Future of Food fellowship that I mentioned earlier, like I said, we're looking for people who are pioneering solutions to some of the problems that we have in terms of food, right? Whether it's how much food we waste, or how much little we use, or how access to food is unequal. There's so many different challenges there. And we are looking for companies or ventures who are quite advanced already. So not at idea stage, but somehow already have a business model, have been launched in the market, already have some traction behind them, which is great. When we're interviewing people from different places, we see that obviously it's much easier to find companies at that stage here in Europe, or maybe in the US, or maybe in different other markets. And then, for instance, going back to Zimbabwe, which was a very real example, we interviewed this woman who, from a real place of need, came up with a business idea to first fill the gap, or basically feed her children, and then saw that as an opportunity as well to grow the business, and also with that to tackle some of the challenges around, let's say, all the food that is lost after it's been harvested, or stuff, how much food needs to be imported to Zimbabwe when they actually have this food available there. So quite a few challenges that she realized that she could be tackling with this business idea. But as a woman in a country that doesn't have a tradition of entrepreneurship, as she explained to us, and also as a single mother who already has other concerns apart from, growing her business, her access to stuff like capital or, networks or mentorship is just so much more limited, which means that in the end, the stage of our venture is just not at the same level as the other ones that we actually wanted to include. What she's doing is great, but the stage wasn't. We were just thinking. So then my colleague and I actually had the real question of, the reason why we are bringing in certain ventures at a certain stage is because we feel that with the kind of program that we're offering, we can leverage that to have massive impact. So the reason is impact. We want to have the greatest impact possible. And there's a reason why we've decided to go with certain stage ventures and not others. And at the same time, if we don't think about the background and the context and the access and all these different things, inclusion, basically. If we just don't consider all these other factors, we're not being inclusive. And on the other hand, we're kind of undermining our own impact, because then certain people or certain ventures or certain types of challenges and contexts are excluded from the impact that we're trying to achieve. So it's really a double-edged sword, because we're trying to maximize impact, but we're also trying to be inclusive. And how do we go about it? And our solution was, we're going to take this woman because she's just so incredibly inspiring. And if she had had the same access that I would have had as a female entrepreneur in Europe, then she would probably be much, much, much higher than I would ever be able to achieve. So that was how we leveled the playing field, in a sense. Sorry, that was a very, very long answer as well.
No, it wasn't. It was a brilliant story, because I was sitting here on tenterhooks, like literally listening, going, but what did they do? Please tell me they took her anyway. Please tell me they took her anyway. Because really this is such a crucial point that you made. And it's such a crucial point on so many levels. When we think about funding, like VCs, that when we look at where the money is allocated, 1% is to Black people. When you look at Black women, it's like 0.02% or something crazy, right? And then it's like, well, they don't meet this standard that we've set. But in what principles have these standards set? And are you setting them to only allow certain people to even be able to cross them? Is it deliberate self-selection? Because just because my skill set may not be what you require. And I was reading this really interesting book this week, and it was talking about, there are skill sets that people tend to have in certain jobs, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's a requirement. But what happens is we take these tendential qualities and we make them into job requirements. So it might happen that there are 5 people that do this one job. 5 of them happen to be men. Okay, these men are generally introverted. They're introverted. They can sometimes be moody. They have got an MBA from here, blah, 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 blah. And all of a sudden, the criteria to do this job is based upon the men we know, they know, as opposed to the potential for people with other skill sets to be able to do it. And I'm glad, I'm happy about this story, overwhelmingly so, because this is the point that we have to think about when we're trying to, and the work I do is about recognizing that there is an experience gap, and that's like within the corporate sector. You cannot apply the same method to make white women feel successful versus Black women versus other women of color. You have to look and say, well, what are the barriers to entry here? What are the barriers to entry that are different? What do I need to do to make this an equitable process? Meaning it might be different treatment, but the outcome provides the same access to opportunity. Exactly. And that's what I love, that why you did that.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And I mean, you probably know this as well, Leanne. I think everybody's had this experience as well. When you look at a job description, right, you see, 5+ years of experience in consulting, ideally a master's degree from a well-renowned university. Like, you have all of these, and this is like almost a very extreme example. I think things have changed a bit, especially in certain spaces, but it's still very much the standard that you define your ideal person instead of, describing what the job is and what the person needs to deliver, right? And we learned, and at the we've started implementing this, we learned about this concept of impact descriptions. Again, we come back to the whole topic of impact, instead of job descriptions, where what you're describing is what this person needs to deliver, what kind of impact they will have in their role in this organization. So you put in things like what's expected of you after a month or 6 months and 3 months, all of that. And you put in stuff like, ideally you will have had this experience, or ideally you can do something like this, but you don't put in like exclusivity factors, I would say, such as MBA in this place, or 5 years of experience or whatever. And also what is now standard as well, and what we've included is something like, this is how we, based on our experience in the past, have consider this position and the skills needed. But if you are looking at this and you think that you don't see yourself reflected, but you think that you should definitely be able to do this, then contact us and tell us where do we see it wrong. And I love this change, and this is something we've implemented very recently. So I've had really positive feedback on that, but it's something that I think needs a bit of more time for us to see the actual fruits of it. But when I was researching this, and I was thinking also for myself, seeing something like that instead of 10 years experience and 5 years here and 10 years there, this is so much more open and inclusive, and makes you actually think, or makes you actually consider that other kinds of paths are also great, and not just great, but they're actually constructive and helpful, and they'll add to the organization instead of always just recruiting for the same kinds of people. And this is a bias that I also have. Obviously, everybody has it, but I think recruiters need to be aware of it so much more, right?
No, for sure. And I think we have to think about gender-based behaviors. So, it's not even just the list, but it's also knowing that typically, and everyone bear in mind, typically a woman sees 10, she applies, she sees 10, she has 9, she doesn't apply for the job. Absolutely. A man sees 10, he has 3, he applies for the job because he thinks, well, who cares? If I get in the room, I'll sell my socks off. And this is really like the first part. And this is why I like the fact that you've basically said, hey, this is ideal. But actually, if you think that, irrespective of what we think now, experience, what do they always say? Past performance is not indicative of future performance, right? So, just because it may have worked so far doesn't mean it's going to continue to work. And I think having that sentence, I'd be really interested to hear what the reception is from women who apply for jobs going forward, seeing that when they say, well, it doesn't necessarily reflect me, but I know I can do it, but now I don't need to define why I can do it.
Right. And I mean, I only have informal feedback. We haven't actually had like proper structured feedback on this, but the most of the feedback I've received is, this is brilliant, because it really just makes me think, and it also just pushes people to think a bit more about why they really are the right person for the job or not. So instead of just saying, oh yeah, check, 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 I can actually think, well, let's say, for instance, resilience as, something that you might need for a certain kind of job. Resilience, you can have developed the skill in so many different ways. Right. And perhaps if you were off your career for 3 years because you were taking care of your sick mother, I think that shows a lot of resilience, being able to deal with something like that, right? But usually you wouldn't see that in a job description that requires you to have 5 years of experience in a consulting firm, because a consulting firm can also be an example of how you can get some kind of resilience of a different kind, maybe. But opening it up in that way means that a person who probably was 3 years off, or was a mother for 3 years and wasn't working for 3 years and was dealing with all of that, what that entails, can also say, wait, I also think that I have what it takes to do this job. I also think that I have the stamina and the drive and the resilience. And the reason why I can show this is because I spent 3 years taking care of a sick parent. And I think that really helps me be able to deal with certain situations, right? And I think just opening it up in that way, that people start thinking about the actual job and the actual skill and competence that is needed, or that we think is needed, and sort of going beyond checklists and really thinking about, or even just thinking, I think my experience can add even more than what you're expecting. I think my experience can bring so much more, and we can do something so much bigger than what you're already envisaging, just because you're thinking about an MBA and 5 years experience.
Right. And I think all of this, drills down to, because if we say, like, we have the underlying, or the main goal is to empower, right? Is to empower people to be able to be market participants, to be able to lead the life that they want, to be able to have a positive impact on the environment. So when you kind of start from there, it's all about empowerment and making sure that every cog, every piece in this puzzle leads and directs and drives to purpose. You really have to go right down into the details to make sure each part of the process
True.
also matches up to that, because I posted earlier on today that there's a report that came out which was talking about impact investment, or the implementation, like the impact investment benchmark. And it was saying that, you know, a lot of asset managers in their different functions, you know, they've decided to become impact investors, but what they're having problems is they're aligning themselves to the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, but they're not able to implement the targeted you know, details that sit underneath it. So the question is, how are you following through on your impact? How are you following through on making your changes? Because it's okay to aim for the macro view, but to do that, you also have to think about the micro view. It's not just a trickle down effect. We have to kind of trickle down on one part, but grassroots and go up on the other side, so that we have this combined purposeful economy that works together. But you can't just do one without the other. And this is why I like the story and just the pieces of the puzzle that come together as to how you guys are really looking at building this purposeful economy, is to also provide opportunity, not just via the companies you work with, the entrepreneurs you work with, but also, you know, self-regulating, as it were, you know, what makes sense to us as a company. Because self-regulation for any company is hugely key to being able. It's one thing to want to implement it and say to other people, hey, you go do this, but are you applying the same rules?
Yes. I mean, I think especially also for the do, because what we do is we work with, sorry, these puns are like unintended, but they just come automatically. But what we do is we work with companies and leaders and almost try and make it just obvious, and or try and make the case for why it is important to do these kinds of things, right? Like, why do you need to sort of get on board with looking at purpose in your business? Why do you need to be a vulnerable leader? Why do you have to have an inclusive organization? And we work with them on that to help them on that journey. So what kind of organization would we be if we were not, at least, you know, we're not perfect, obviously, but if we weren't at least trying to look inwards at the same time and do the work for ourselves. And so that's almost an imperative. Otherwise, we don't even have a selling point if we're not doing the same work that we're requesting of society and the world to do as well, right?
Well, that's a company with a conscience, I dare say. There are loads of companies who aren't in that boat.
Absolutely.
You know, it doesn't feel like an imperative, but then it's one of those things where when you're looking at how deeply ingrained is your desire to change the world, how deeply ingrained are your values, and is your purpose? Because the answer to that will always be reflected in the manner in which you work.
Absolutely.
But not just on the superficial level, but how you interact with others. That will be something that you will choose yourself. You won't decide, okay, well, I'm going to you don't get to, well, you shouldn't get to pick and choose when you decide to be purposeful, when you decide to be impactful. It should be something that is
intrinsic.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That's the perfect word. And if it's not intrinsic, then the point is, how do you get to the point where it becomes that way? That should be, you know, for me, that should be the goal. That I'm not going to say it becomes natural in nature, or it's subconscious, because you never want it to be subconscious, because then you lose the drive to make the change. But I think it's about being principled and purposeful continuously in what you're doing, to make sure that you keep checking, you keep self-reflecting and saying, hey, am I still doing this in a way that the outcome is still as sustainable, as balanced, as inclusive, as resilient as it should be, with the original pillars of my values that I had in mind?
Absolutely. And that, and what you just talked about right now is, you know, it's a lot around self-reflection and the ability to learn, right? It's also because, you know, you can have your values and you can have identified a clear pathway to purpose in your organization, and still all the time you're going to get questioned on that, and you're going to get situations where you realize you're not on that right track, or you kind of lost track of something, you lost sight of something. And even today, I had a conversation with some people from my team and an expert that works with us that really pushed my boundaries around my thinking, where I realized, wait, we're not doing this right. And this was just a person who is very well connected to us in the Do School or at the Do, and who has worked with us very closely, and just pushed back on a couple of things around, how we work with experts, and just sort of basic things in our interaction. And it just made me think. It just made me realize, okay, we need more transparency. We need just a bit more structure. And I thought we were doing things as well as possible, but I at the same time, I'm always then reminded, no, you're not. And this has an impact, again, on people and how people feel valued and appreciated, and and sort of how you interact with them and how you act with them. And so you have to just always keep thinking and accepting and learning. And even today, at a point, I felt myself getting defensive, because, that's your natural instinct. And then I had to breathe and think, no, this person's right. And this was not well done from my side. And I have to rethink this again. And again, think about values and purpose and direction, and again, iterate. Right?
Yeah. And again, and I think one of the key things is as well that we should never forget is that our purpose, our value will always be tested.
Always.
It's never going to be that moment where you say, and I think this is kind of the part about whether it's, climate change, whether it's racial equity, whether it's gender equality, that people have to realize that it's not a moment. This is going away. This is something that has, especially when, talk about racial equity, this is something that has been going on for centuries, which means that you cannot decide that it's going to be over tomorrow. No. We still have to keep going. And we have to keep going, and we have to keep going. And it's going to be, not in perpetuity, but for a very long time, until certain changes happen. It's going to be that point where we're going to have to keep going and pushing back and questioning and pushing back. And there will be no such thing as there. And it's just the same with, economics. Which economy is ever 100% stable? Never. There's comes out with something else, a new instrument, a new way to calculate this, a new deflation, stagflation, this, that. It's never something where you can say, well, I know everything that's going on economically, because you don't. And it's also that part about we cannot, especially when it's to do with values and creating a purposeful economy or creating significant change, we can't afford to stagnate. We can't afford to sit and say, well, I know it now. So
next. My father used to say, and I'm pretty sure he ripped this off from someone else, but he used to say, change is the only constant. And I think that's obviously something that's right. And it is like, change is the only constant in a sense of, even if you stand still, things will keep moving. But also, if you want to move with those, you have to also change yourself, right? So it's a two-way thing.
Right. And I like that. I think that might be a physics phrase, and I wasn't very good at physics. But I think
he was a chemical engineer, so I think that's possible. He did a lot of it.
Because if you think about it, right, if you do nothing and you stay in one place, time still goes forward, so you're going backwards.
Exactly.
Time still does this. You stay in the first, like you're not doing anything. And I think that's the part about really trying to connect the dots, because there's never going to be a point where you say to yourself, oh, I can't go a layer deeper. I can't find another way, because just your story today was, the future of food, looking for amazing candidates, creating, and this isn't negatively, creating a benchmark or, an entry level, but then realizing that, hey, there are actually really worthy people who don't match what we've created, but they still nevertheless deserve a chance, because they've shown through this particular lady's, her drive, being a single mother, having children, having a business, living against a social backdrop that doesn't promote entrepreneurship, and then on top of that, her being a woman, all of those. And then if you kind of put even more so, her being, I think she's Black. Did you say she was Black, or is she not?
Yeah. She's Black.
A Black woman just thinking about getting funding and access to funding. Then you kind of having to say, well, you know what? I thought I was making an impact, but actually I've been shown that the way in which I can make an impact, the way in which I can build a purposeful economy is very different, because she now stands in the possibility of showing other generations of children, women, boys and girls, that, hey, entrepreneurship is possible in Zimbabwe. It can be done. I can do it. I can get the support. Do you know something? I might just try it. And that's where you see, like, impact isn't just about that one person. It's how, what does that person represent for others as role models? What does that person represent in their community? How will she then leverage her resources and knowledge to then help other mothers, other parents who are potentially financially strapped, to use her methodology, to use her idea, to create a place where other children are eating nutritionally balanced meals, are having access, and the ripple effects are endless.
Yes, exactly.
It just goes on and on and on. And I think that's the beauty of when you look at, as I said, the word economy and economics can sometimes feel a bit stale, but it's not. Yeah, I know. But it's so dynamic, and there's so much impact and so much change that you can affect purely by starting in one place and saying, well, I'm going to look at this as a way to make change. Right.
Again, it's just, widening your perspective and questioning yourself again and again about sort of, not stereotypes, but I guess about sort of standards or benchmarks, like you said, that you've set yourself, that you then have to either just keep questioning and either reaffirm them or change them constantly.
Is there a book that's called The Great Unlearning, or have I made that up?
I've heard that phrase, the Great Unlearning, with connection to, last year's BLM movement and all of that.
Yeah, I think it was Rachel Cargill. Yeah, that's it. She talked about the Great Unlearning, and it's kind of like you have to start to break down in your mind all the things you think you know, because they have been created. They've been created via dominant culture, white male lens. So what we see as standards, what we see as talent, what we see as, a way to create opportunity has been created through one lens and one lens only. And this is kind of where we have to decide to say, well, actually, there's more than one lens and there's more than one way. And it doesn't mean because you've created this structure that others who are deserving don't get to play in this market, don't get to play in this economy. Right. And it takes time, I think, for companies to unlearn what they think they know, for people, because essentially companies are just made up of loads of people.
With processes on top of it,
With processes on top of it. And it's that willingness to say, well, am I really, truly willing to unlearn what I thought I knew, to challenge the assumptions of everything I thought I knew?
True.
To make a change and not actually worry and say, well, if I do this, I'm not going to make any money, because it's also not true.
Yeah, true. And it's so interesting what you were saying, because the whole perspective of whiteness or Westerners or whatever, it's there for the good and also for the bad, but also sometimes for the good, which then in turn becomes exclusive again. And I'm saying this and it sounds super complicated, but I'm thinking of another example of an interview that we had recently with somebody who's from Eswatini, and she has created a whole brand of foods that are dairy and gluten and sugar-free. So, healthy foods for certain kinds of people that either want to be very healthy or also just have like gut issues or other kinds of immune conditions that they need to be a bit more aware about their food. And her contention was, this is a market that is completely Western dominated. The way that we approach making foods that are dairy and gluten and sugar-free is always from a Western perspective or a European perspective. It's never thinking, for instance, about African grains or indigenous grains that you'll find somewhere else. Last year, we also had somebody in the fellowship that they were making plant-based milk with an almond that is grown in Africa. And forgive me, I forgot the name, but they were basically saying, why are we not using this? This is something that is indigenous to us, that we have. Why do we have to go all the way to California to get the other kinds of almonds, which is also has another kind of impact in terms of environment and society and all of that? Why can't we just think about it in a broader way? And I think, part of it is obviously because the movement, for instance, for healthy food maybe starts in certain places, but it then dominates the conversation yet again in a good way. It's good that in Europe people are investing a bit more in healthy food. It's good that people are looking a bit more for healthy food, but that also neglects a massive target group that have their own wisdom and traditions that we can all tap into, and that they also want to tap into, but they can't because there's this dominance from a different part of the world. Do you know what I mean?
I understand what you're saying. Like, on the one hand, it's great that people are having this heightened awareness to be healthy, but it shouldn't be at the expense of other countries who grow the same products having to ship Western products that they have.
Exactly. That's one example. Or
And
even
then,
at least, sorry.
No.
Or even if we're not even talking about, you know, how these other countries are suffering from it, just the fact that their wisdom and their knowledge is not being considered when we're thinking about healthy foods, right? That we should be thinking about. I mean, there's, and I'm not an expert on this, obviously, so I can't really give you specific examples. But when I was talking to this person, she was saying, there's all these different grains, there's all these different ingredients that we should be using here that are indigenous to, she's from Eswatini, so from Swaziland, that are indigenous to here. And instead, like you were saying, we're importing, you know, almond flour from somewhere else. Whereas we could just be doing this here if we invested in it. And if it was recognized by the wider public that this is also an approach to healthy food.
But I think the problem with that is, or I say that a lot of it, I can give you an example. When my grandparents moved to Jamaica, the things that Jamaican people used to eat was called poor man's food back then. So, you know, when, for example, in the past few years, sorrel has become the big thing. Oh, sorrel, like Jamaicans have been drinking sorrel for like the last millennia. This is not new news. You know, or if it's talking about, you know, like once upon a time eating an avocado pear wasn't also a thing, you know, oh, it's too fatty, it's this, that. But there's so much about food and the healthy food not being embraced as being healthy until white dominant culture decides that it's healthy. That's the problem. That's the point. Because it's always this food has always been there. You know, it's been there, and it was imported to the UK from the Caribbean, from wherever. And you know, Jamaican people still had sorrel in Britain. They were still buying it, but everyone said it was poor people's food. No one wanted it. It was only when it became a fad and people started talking about green juices, or even something as simple as ginger. You know, like, and I'm not talking ginger that the powder, but actually like using fresh ginger. Stuff covered in sugar, all of this stuff, all of this food knowledge that a lot of people who were from, whether they're from the Caribbean, the continent of Africa, where it might be, this was all ignored. But this is how dominant culture fundamentally works. Dominant culture dictates what is allowed to be relevant.
Right. What's marketed, what's made available. And then we fall into the other extreme, which is, you know, what we've all heard about, like quinoa and avocado, and how the extreme consumption of those of those kinds of staples from, you know, Europe or the US are also, you know, we don't need to open that kind of worms, but they're just opening up so many different kinds of issues as well locally. So that's the other side of it.
Right. But I think this is about like I think part of it is also, and this is like a really relevant point, even though we started with food, which is when anything is, you know, when you think about purposeful economy, and I didn't currently put it together until just now, which is a purposeful economy also has to shift the gaze that it can't be defined by the dominant culture. It has to then have that same breadth in terms of being equitable. Who is making the decisions on selection? That also has to run the full gamut. Otherwise, it's still done with a dominant culture gaze, which is then selecting. And that is that also, and it's so the remit, as it were, of a purposeful economy is so big, but at the same, but it shouldn't mean by any sense of the imagination that you should stop doing it. It means that it might take time, or even a little bit more time, to make changes, because as you said, like we went from entrepreneurship, individual impact, food, migrant, like immigration, being invited, all of this stuff, like economy, money touches every facet of life, no question. So it's really looking at breaking down every single pillar, every single touch point, to say, well, like the three, I won't forget them. Is this sustainable? Is it resilient? And is it inclusive? And asking those three questions at every single point. If you're saying no to one of them, then you haven't achieved your goal. And that for me is like, wow, yeah. And I think if people started to apply that method, I think a lot of their processes and the way they work and who they deal with and how they deal with them would be thrown into question.
Absolutely. And like you said, it's such a massive, purposeful economy basically just describes the whole world. But I think the way to go about it without getting overwhelmed is just to think about what is your sphere of influence, right? Leanne, you're working on racial equity and gender equity and gender equality. And this is where you choose to then apply the three principles of inclusivity, sustainability, and resilience, right? And I want to do the same thing, and I do that in people empowerment. And then if all of us just choose to apply this to your own little world, then I guess that's how you shift the economy as a whole.
And it's, even if we think about, like, I had this conversation, I think earlier on in the year, how we as individuals also use our power by choosing what brands, who we spend our money with. Who am I going to spend my money with, this person or that person? How do they produce their garments? How do, am I going to buy my food from here or from there? And I think, as you said, it's your sphere of influence, and it's us, everybody taking responsibility to say, I don't have to do what Goldman Sachs does. I don't have to do what Fearless Fund does or any of these other big companies. I don't have to do what Elgin does. I can actually do what I can within my sphere of influence, because if I am intentional about looking at all the three ways, these three key factors, everybody has the possibility to shift the needle somehow, somewhere.
Absolutely. That's beautifully said.
You gave it to me. You handed it to me. I just took it.
Just like you just package it very nicely and just handed it back. That's like, in how Germans say Schlusswort zum Sonntag. I don't actually know how to translate, but as in that's just it. You just nailed it.
Thank you. It wasn't meant, like, it was actually meant to be your mic drop, but I
don't think I can add anything to that. But thank you as well, because it's really interesting to talk about these things and sort of bounce ideas back and forth, and just to see how, even today, and I think we're pretty aligned in a lot of things, but just the way that you phrase things and the way that the perspective that you bring in just makes me think about what I do every day on a daily basis from a different perspective. So thank you for that.
No, it's been amazing having you, because as I said, like in every conversation that we've had, you open the door for me to learn, to see what's going on out there, to see how it is, in that case, to kind of be in the epicenter and seeing how change is happening and seeing the whole process, which, when you work with companies, obviously I see the process, but that's very different from going from like ideation through to like actually having a concept, a prototype, bringing it to market, doing all that's a very different process. It's super exciting. So I'm going to say thank you for coming. You've been an awesome guest, Catia. I've had a great conversation. And where can the lovely people find you? Handles, and I'll post it afterwards. But where can they find you?
Yeah. So they can find me on LinkedIn. That's the best way to get in touch as well. So Catia Dawood, you should find me easily. I'm not very active otherwise on social media on a personal level, but obviously the do is, and you can find the do also on your social media channel of choice. So whether it's Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn as well. And also you might want to check out our do community, which is basically where we bring in pretty much everyone in our ecosystem, whether they're business leaders or entrepreneurs or anything in between. That's where we connect everybody and bring everyone together and have amazing conversations as well. So I would definitely redirect you there.
Perfect. So it has been amazing. Thank you everybody for joining, and you will see me again soon.
Thank you, Leanne.
Bye.